Hi, sweeties. How are you doing? Welcome to Sim. Thank you so much for the support. Hope you all are doing great. So I came across this video. This young man, Cope, who was talking about how these people have always been sexually right, and why he was talking about he really went in depth and explained other people's culture. He talked about Nigerians. He talked about, I think, Nigerian Igbos. I am from the Igbo, and everything he said about the Omomo was actually correct. Then he talked about the Yoruba, which I also which is also correct. Then talked about the South Africans and some other people. Then he went further to talk about their own and other countries, right? So a lot of people were like in the comment section. Some are kind of surprised, but I am not surprised because if you know history, you definitely will understand that everything he said is absolutely on point. And some people are like, wait, why are they this way? Some are like, there is also need for people to read in depth about sex, religion, and other things and understand somehow how some certain things are happening. Some are like, wait, I have been expecting you to 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 make a video like this, but they are glad that he made the video. But I am not going to lie to you. Everything he said, everything he said was absolutely on point. These people are just something else. But you know what? I am just gonna roll this clip so we'll see it. So let's get into it.
Europeans have always been sexually deviant. In Europe between 500 and 1500 CE, the penitentials, for example, the penitential Theodori, outlined penalties for intercourse with animals, infants, corpses, and demons, because these were rampant. Priests were caught in bestiality scandals with pigs and sheep across France and England. Guys, hit the link in the bio ASAP. I'm definitely losing the account for this one. Chastity belts weren't just invented, they were enforced. Women's genitals were literally locked by law. Meanwhile, in Africa, the Americas, and Polynesia, sex was integrated into social, ecological, and spiritual rhythms. The Igbo held erotic festivals like Omumu, celebrating fertility as a communal blessing. Hawaiians practiced Aikapu, a balanced system of gender-segregated but sacred food and sex taboos, rooted in harmony, not shame. Among the Nawa, adolescent sexuality was openly discussed and guided by elders, not demonized or hidden. Europe made sex about punishment. The rest of the world made it about continuity. Par au Cerf, Louis XV's pedophilic playground, funded by the French state, was staffed with girls aged between 12 and 15, forcibly taken or bribed from peasant families. Court records show officials managing logistics of rape as royal entitlement. Consent was a meaningless concept in a legal system where women couldn't testify against aristocrats. In comparison, Akan puberty rights, for example, Bergoro, centered girls with music, mentorship, and celebration, not shame or sexual access. Among Diné or Navajo, girls experienced the Kinalda ceremony to honor menstruation, framed as a moment of power, not perversion. The Zulu practiced umemulo, where girls marked womanhood with dance and spear-giving, not sexual servitude. Europeans saw young girls as property. Other cultures saw them as power incarnate. The 1860 Indian Penal Code, Section 377, criminalized all unnatural sexual acts, targeting hijras, same-sex couples, and non-binary communities. In Uganda, Nigeria, and Ghana, British officials imposed sodomy laws still used to persecute queer people to this day. Gender diversity was reframed as criminality, a direct attack on existing indigenous norms. Compare that to the Bugis in Sulawesi. Indonesia recognized 5 genders, including Bisu, who held sacred ceremonial roles. Zapotec communities in Oaxaca recognized Muxes, gender-diverse people respected as caretakers and artisans. In the Pacific Northwest, Two-spirit people were respected in their communities long before European contact criminalized them. The world didn't invent queerness recently. Europe criminalized it globally. French soldiers systematically raped Algerian women during raids. Rape was logged as military efficiency, not atrocity, photographed and distributed through colonial postcards. These assaults were consumed as softcore propaganda in Europe. French psychiatric journals published studies on native women's resistance, code for sexual disobedience. Tuareg women owned property, initiated marriage, and moved freely across public space. Berber matrilineal traditions preserved land through the mother's line. Under Islam, pre-French North African societies granted more bodily and legal autonomy to women than Victorian France. France called this liberation. It was systemic desecration. In the Americas, Jesuits banned puberty, fertility, and marriage rituals, but documented them in detail, often with erotic overtones. Mission records describe swaying breasts, open nudity, and wild dances, while demanding forced clothing and conversion. Ashaninka and Shuar people practiced ceremonial sexual unions tied to harvest and lunar cycles. Mapuche women underwent Nyatun ceremonies, where fertility was praised, not repressed. Yoruba spiritual traditions venerated orishas of love, pleasure, and sensuality, like Oshun, as divine forces of healing. The Jesuits condemned these acts as lewd. They were simply too colonized to comprehend sacred sexuality. Sarki Bartman, a South African woman, was paraded naked in freak shows, then dissected and displayed post-mortem. Her genitals and brain were kept in jars at Musée de l'Homme until 1974. Her body was studied, fetishized, and displayed in the name of science, race theory, and civilization. Among the Khoikhoi, women's bodies were celebrated through dance, fertility songs, and communal healing. Across much of Africa, larger bodies were signs of health, abundance, and divine favor, not ridicule. In Mande societies, body decoration, nudity, and dance were expressions of freedom, not shame. Europeans didn't liberate her body. They turned it into a museum exhibit, and then called it education. Europe had the archives, but the world had the wisdom. What Europeans brought to the world sexually was not enlightenment. It was disorder, moral panic, not balance, repression, not ritual, exhibitionism, not embodiment, rape, not reciprocity. Across the planet, sex was a spectrum, a biological, spiritual, communal force. Europe made it into a crime, a contract, or a conquest. Cope. Europeans have always erased language. They didn't arrive in silence. They arrived with the intention to silence, because they knew if the land still spoke, it wasn't theirs. If people could still name themselves, they couldn't be owned. If the tongue still carried cosmology, resistance was always possible. So they didn't just burn books. They burned grammars. They didn't just outlaw dialects. They outlawed ways of being. Language was the first casualty of empire. Before contact, there were over 15,000 spoken languages across Earth. Post-contact, 6,000 remain, with over 40% critically endangered, and the vast majority erased by European conquest. This wasn't natural decline. It was linguicide by design. 1492, Columbus arrives. By 1550, Taino, Arawak, Siboney, and 50 other Caribbean languages are extinct. 1562, Diego de Landa burns Maya codices in Mani, Yucatan. He writes his own grammar of the Maya tongue, only after destroying native speakers' access to it. Between the 1830s and 1920s, across British Canada and the US, residential school systems criminalized the use of Ojibwe, Cree, Lakota, Diné, and over 300 native tongues. 1884, Berlin Conference begins. Within decades, over 2,000 African languages are marginalized, declared dialects, or rendered unfit for print. Between 1948 and 1994, apartheid South Africa teaches black children in Afrikaans and English, while criminalizing traditional Bantu languages in state institutions. Today, at least one language dies every 40 days, and most are indigenous, most in places once colonized by Europe. This is not linguistic evolution. It's epistemicide at empire scale. Colonialism required linguistic subjugation. They didn't just want land. They wanted to own the narrative, and that meant controlling the script. In the Americas, Spanish and Portuguese missionaries demanded indigenous children learn Catholic catechisms in Latin, enforced by whips, rations, and isolation. Speaking Nahuatl, Mapudungun, Quechua, Guarani equals punishment. In French West Africa, colonial administrators forced Wolof, Fula, and Bambara speakers to adopt French as the language of civilization by denying native speakers access to courts, jobs, and education unless they complied. In Australia, the 1905 Aborigines Act enabled the government to seize children from multilingual indigenous households, leading to linguistic annihilation of over 250 Aboriginal languages within a century. They didn't translate. They replaced. They didn't learn. They erased. What was erased wasn't just words. It was world-making. Every language killed by Europe contained entire sciences. Nahuatl has dual-rooted verbs that collapse existence and action, meaning who you are is what you do. Yoruba contains tonal shifts, which encode emotion, context, and spiritual alignment. Spoken language as divination system. Ainu of Japan holds no gendered pronouns and prioritizes verbs of transformation over verbs of possession. Walpuri embeds absolute direction, north-south, east-west, in its grammar, so every sentence spoken situates you in space, relative to land. Kalali Sut of Greenlandic Inuit builds entire paragraphs into a single word, merging past, present, conditional, and collective time. An extinct click language of the Kalahari, had a lexicon for animal tracks, cloud formations, soil textures, and migration seasons. Satal Maya includes elevation into all spatial speech. Landscape is not described. It is lived grammatically. These are not just vocabularies. They are living blueprints of memory, ecology, math, agriculture, astronomy, and kinship. When Europe killed the language, they didn't just lose words. They ripped out the knowledge archive. And what they didn't kill, they caged. Ngugi wa Thiong'o was imprisoned by the British-backed Kenyan state for writing a play in Kikuyu. Inuit children in Canadian schools were beaten for speaking Inuktitut, now revitalized only after Canada needed it to claim Arctic sovereignty. France banned Breton, Occitan, Corsican, and Basque in schools until the late 20th century, despite their Indo-European roots, because even European diversity was a threat to the imperial state. The Irish language was nearly eliminated under British rule, surviving only through underground schooling, or Scoula na Scarcha. In 1800, 50% of Ireland spoke Irish. By 1920, it was under 5%. Europe doesn't preserve languages. It withholds them. It museums them. It funds studies on what it refused to fund when it mattered. It grants minority status to what it once labeled barbaric noise. And then they monetized the remains. Endangered language grammars are now datafied by tech giants to train voice recognition and AI translation systems with no consent from the surviving communities. Linguistic researchers publish career-defining dissertations on extinct tongues without offering restitution to the descendants of the speakers. Museums hold audio archives of indigenous elders recorded in their final years. After decades of forced silence, they destroy the root, then sell the fossil. They called it civilization after they muzzled the world. Europeans didn't just erase languages, they waged a planetary campaign of muting, because the tongue wasn't just a tool, it was a territory. And conquest isn't complete until you rename everything, and no one left remembers the original word. They called it progress. We call it the killing of the breath. Cope.
This is all I got from this video. This young man is holding them to ransom. Now, I am going to ask this. When he talked about the sexual aspect of, right, he did not lie. Like, have always been sexual deviant. Because most of the things he talked about, I know them. And he talked about not just only Africa, he talked about Africans, and he talked about also other countries too. I have told you people that I am Nigerian, right? And I am Igbo. He talked about the Igbos. That is what they call Omomo, right? And he talked about the South Africans too, which I know about what he talked about. And sincerely speaking, I do not understand how the mainstream media, how they were, I don't know if I should say that they were bribed or because it's them that owns the media, right? How all these things are not being out. But the reality is that if you know history, if you understand history, you definitely will know that this is 100% truth. He did not lie. He did not lie, not even for a minute. And I saw people in the comment section saying, for real? Some are like, cannot comply. Is this true? And so we're like, oh yeah, we've been waiting for you to say something like this. We've been waiting for you to say this. And I am sure that you people also know this. Because if you all say sincerely speaking, I don't know how to explain this thing in depth, like so that everybody will get to understand it. But this platform is really crazy, and I am trying so hard to avoid some certain things. Now you remember where he talked about how they use some bodies and they sexualize it and then call it experiments. Yes, that is 100% correct. I don't know where this boy, but sincerely speaking, he really went really so far to make this research, and he did everything. Sounds about right. Like his research are always on point. Um, Sincerely speaking, I am not saying that everybody must know this, but I know my people know everything he said. Like literally everything he said. And if you look around, it looks like, some certain things about them transcends. I don't know if that is correct. Like, it's kind of like from generation to generation. You all know how they sexualized their ancestors, right? Then it also look like if you see from some generations past to this very moment, you can tell me that the way they also when they see people that look like me, especially women, you all know how endowed people that look like me are, right? When they see people that look like me, automatically something is going wrong. And you never can process, like you don't even want to think. I wish there is a read, something that reads their mindset or just the brain, how the brain reacts when they see women, people that look like me. So everything he said are all on point. And this boy, but this man, really, I hope nothing happens to his account, and I hope he continues to spread the message, continue to hold them accountable for majority of the things they did. Absolutely very educative. I enjoyed it. Cope.